Welcome back to Kivumbi 2017. The conversation continues here as we try to preempt on the major announcement the country is awaiting for from NASA leader Raila Odinga later today. In studio with me for this conversation, political analysts Mark Bichachi, Joseph Simeka and Moses Cherono. Cherono, let me come to you. Just before we went on break, we're trying to see what options will be fueling the announcement by Raila Odinga today. And among the things that his sources have pointed to is that he will be calling for an independent audit of the presidential election results. And this means verifying the Forms 34A and Forms 34B that were contested just before the results were announced. Your thoughts on how this is going to be factored into the announcement he will be making today?
To be honest, Michelle, a lot of anticipation has been put into what Raila is going to say today. But from where I sit, I can only see three possibilities. The first possibility is to concede.
Which he has ruled out.
Which he has ruled out. But from where I sit, I really see no other avenues apart from conceding. Because from my observation, the electoral process was by and large fair and credible. And even the international observers did confirm that. So that is one, I think, the most viable possibility for Raila. The second one is to maybe call for mass action. But I honestly, just looking at the country at the moment, I don't think there is you will find a lot of support in terms of being able to mobilize support and people to come onto the streets and be able to take his cause. The other option is to file a Supreme Court petition, which he has indicated he's not going to do. So just going back a little bit, I observed when Raila started coming out with his grievance about the election, especially as regards to the technology situation, it seemed from an observer point of view that the evidence that he was adducing was not very convincing. So I was trying to imagine what kind of narrative the former Prime Minister might be trying to build up. And to me, just based on what happened in the last elections, he may be trying to create a grievance narrative that can hold the opposition together. Something that you can constantly complain around for the next 5 years, so that you can hold your base together. All
right, and of course he says we are not done yet as NASA. Let me come to you, Simeka, in terms of as much as they've ruled out the option of going to court, there is a possibility that a petition at the Supreme Court may be filed by proxy, perhaps by a civil society group that is in tandem with NASA's concerns. That is likely to also throw a spanner into the works in terms of the timelines that have been set out. There's only 3 days left to the filing of that petition. NASA has ruled out the court option. How is that going to play out if a petition is filed by a third party?
Yeah, there's a possibility a petition could be filed, not even necessarily by proxy, because the Constitution allows even yourself, myself, or any one of us who are Kenyans, voters, to file a petition if we are unhappy with the outcome of the election. Right. So there's a possibility that that could happen. Obviously, that would extend anxiety, that would extend the period expected for the President to be President Kenyatta to be re-sworn in. And that perhaps would give time for the various contested issues to be prosecuted, not just in that Supreme Court, but also in the Court of Public Opinion and on the international stage. So I think what really is going to matter is grievances have been raised. What evidence is going to be produced to support these grievances? I think what I see, a lot of the anxiety I see and a lot of the questions I hear from people, and we've been chatting with it with my colleagues here before this show, is what is the evidence for this and that? Right. There's a lot of anxiety about that. And maybe what we may find out today from Honorable Raila's statement is that it could have been deliberate, that they do not want to put out that evidence in the public, perhaps giving IEBC time to do the things they've asked it to do. They do not want their competitors to see this evidence and have time to do certain things to defend themselves and so on. There's a myriad reasons why I would have a case against you and I don't have to bring out my evidence in public until a certain time that the timing is suitable to me.
The problem with that statement is this, is that you're having a situation where you've called for people to have the court of public opinion running at the same time as you are putting together these so-called evidences that you're talking about.
Right.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. What NASA needs to do, if we are absolutely honest, is they need to come out very clearly and say, this is exactly what our grievances are, this is exactly what the problems are, and these are the solutions that we are seeking. And further to that point, let's remember that if you want any system audited, filing a case at the Supreme Court and saying this is the evidence that I have, I would like these systems to be checked, is not outside the realms of reason.
Right.
And let's also understand that it's actually good for our democracy, whether the petition goes through or not. If 2013 is anything to go by, it is good for our democracy for us to question our systems. Just the same way someone who does any job, at the end of the day, you have a performance review. So should we review what the IEBC did to find out how elections can be better? Of course, just the same way we review every ministry and every state arm. These are things that are enshrined within our constitution. It is within our legal right as Kenyans to access anything that has been publicly procured, because we are the owners of this information.
Right.
We are the owners of that data. I do not see the connection between mass action or any large statement like that with protocols and processes that exist in law already.
And of course, he says that this is not about him. It's not about Raila Odinga. For him, it's a bigger call about not legitimizing electoral malpractices in the country. But like, like you say, the evidence that they've provided as to their claims that he was the rightful winner of this election has not been very convincing to Kenyans. Do you expect perhaps that there will be today fielding, because sources close to us say that he will also be, he may rather also be fielding that evidence that they have from their own tallying center that he won this election. But remember, the claims that we've made have also been contradicting. One hand, they say they do not trust results on the IBC server, which are a sham. On the other hand, they say they did find the real results on the same IBC server, which favor them, and they wanted those results to be used to swear him in. You know, a lot of confusing statements, the country seemingly left in disarray. I don't know what you make of this.
I think this is something that you've said that is not accurate. The results they contested, and they said this in public, are not what they found allegedly, I think I should use that word, allegedly found on the IEBC server. The results they contested are what were being projected publicly. Those are two different things, so there's no confusion there.
Right.
It's very clear that what was being seen on, projected to people's houses and so on television screens as results is what they were contesting, and they were saying no, the real results are elsewhere, and they gave that statement saying that they have been able to obtain those results. I hope that this, as you rightly say, that this should be able to come out in public so that people can interrogate it for its veracity. I would begin by giving anybody who raises a concern like this or over such a serious process, I would begin by giving them the benefit of doubt and just making that demand, yes, make this public so that the whole world can see the basis of your complaints.
Right.
Instead of casting aspersions. I would, like any other person, he and his colleagues have a right to question this process. So I think the best thing is to begin by giving him and his colleagues benefit of doubt and then saying, okay, let's bring it on, let's see it.
And on that same space, then, we can conclusively say here that it would be wrong to call for mass action for a process you've not started. You understand?
I haven't had Raila call for any mass action at all.
Let's
absolutely, that is unfair.
No, just wait. Let's not.
Or let's give us the evidence that is called for mass action.
Can I finish my statement? When you say that we are going to the court of public opinion, okay? There are things that are inferred. They don't need to be stated. And Kenyans are not foolish. The fact of the matter is the demonstrations that we've seen are as a result of the statements that NASA has given. Let's be honest. Let's not split hairs. Let's be honest, Kenyans. Now, the reality of the matter is this. Every Kenyan has a right to picket and to demonstrate. My issue in this particular picketing and demonstration is if you asked that Kenyan who's demonstrating, what is the one thing that you're demonstrating for if you are given even this demonstration ends. And the problem is this: there is no legal avenue that has blocked any of the processes that you're talking about. No one has blocked NASA to come out with the evidence that they have. No one kept NASA from getting Form 34s at the tallying stations and the polling stations. No one has stopped NASA from actually having an IBC audit. So what are we demonstrating about? The reality of the matter: if there was a roadblock to this particular process, then we would have something to discuss. Outside of that, we are being disingenuous.
All right, let's hear from Moses for a moment. In this issue of, but we'll come back to the mass protests, which have not officially been called yet. But another option that has been fronted is the possibility of dialogue with President Uhuru Kenyatta. There are those also fronting the possibility of a power-sharing deal between the two, just in the, in an effort to ensure we do not fall back to the 2007-2008 post-election situation. Your thoughts on that particular scenario?
In fact, I do agree on the avenue of dialogue. From where I sit, I see that I heard what Atwale recently say that perhaps the president should even visit Raila at his home, which I totally concur with, because I think on the Jubilee part, they need to exercise a lot of magnanimity in the win that they've had. Raila has been in the battlefield fighting for political leadership of this country for the last several decades.
Right.
And I think this was the end for him. It was the final straw, so to say. So, and I feel that there is a lot of sort of bitterness on his part as to how things have panned out. So I think on the part of the leadership, on the part of the Jubilee leadership, there should be a lot of magnanimity to show, to show support to what the guy has been able to achieve over the course of his career.
Right. Simeka, perhaps even as we talk about dialogue and power sharing, that brings in the conversation. Many say we may perhaps need to change, our system of voting so that we don't have a winner gets all situation, and the losers feel aggrieved because they've lost everything. Is this, a situation that you think the opposition would be open to a dialogue and possibly a power sharing deal in the course of this debate?
First, personally, given what I believe in, if Raila were to say that let's discuss how to share power, I would be extremely disappointed. I would actually ask him, is that what you were really looking for? That you want to share power with Uhuru Kenyatta? I think there are bigger issues that, from the statements I've had and from what I observe myself, that we ought to focus on: the electoral system, the system of governance of this country, the issues. What are the grievances that make our elections so emotive, that they bring out so much tension? And there are issues that we actually just touch on, and you can hear how emotive they are. For example, I'll give you an example, is an issue of land. Secondly, an issue of exclusion in public affairs, management of public affairs and access to resources and opportunities. Extremely emotive issues. I would say those are the things that one should focus on, and not say it's just about Raila sharing power. He's a fairly powerful guy. I mean, he's an opposition leader, but he's sort of an extraordinary opposition leader who almost moves around like a president. What other power would he be looking for other than power to serve the Kenyans, to serve the country, to help move the country to the next level? I wouldn't see that happening with a mere negotiation for sharing of power. For me, that would be secondary, totally secondary. I would want us to focus, and I hope that they focus on what is it that makes these elections so emotive, and if and when they go wrong, you get extremely unhappy and very angry, because you would have preferred that they go, that certain things happen in a particular way. Secondly, to question the electoral system, we should be asking, did things go right? Did actually the IEBC do things in accordance with the Constitution, our laws, and electoral regulations? If we get responses to those questions and we are satisfied, I think the country moves very comfortably to the next two, in the future, into the future.
And of course, Moses, earlier on you mentioned that observers said the process was free, fair, and credible. But remember, Raila Odinga did have an interview with the CNN where he completely discredited the observers, saying they didn't quite get, what was going on in the country, the real issues in the country. But still focusing on what announcement he will be giving today, it will have a major outcome on the economy, on security most of all, which is top on the agenda for most Kenyans as we speak now. How do you think whatever outcome, whatever announcement will be, is likely to impact on the security of the country?
Let me go back a little bit and just touch on what you said. I think, albeit the election might have been free and fair and credible, as observers might have said, there is still the issue of inclusivity. If you look at the political leadership of the country, it has tended to reside in one part of, maybe two parts of the nation, the Mount Kenya region and the Rift Valley region. So, there is also the issue of inclusivity. What are the other communities thinking in terms of being part of the national process? So that is a very big issue in terms of even if Raila, for example, goes out of stage, what happens to his constituency? Will they disintegrate even further so that you are left with, a situation where you have one dominant or two dominant communities ruling the country? So there is a very big issue as regards inclusivity.
Right, and of course that has also been put to question. If at all they do call for mass action on the streets, how is it likely to impact on their supporters and what they call their strongholds? Many right now are pointing out to the fact that as we speak, in the post-election protests and skirmishes and the few deaths that have been reported, many are targeting only one community, and that is the Luo community. But the NASA coalition does not only represent the Luo community. So when they do call, if rather they do call for mass protests, how do you see that working out in terms of keeping their support base intact? Let
me just, speak about first these protests, by the way. On the night the announcement was made by Chebukati that Kenyatta has won, there was public expression on the streets, people expressing themselves happily. And I did encounter this on Gong Road, just around, from Lenana School up to Dagoretti Corner. And there were hordes of people on the road blocking cars and so on. So you really had to move very carefully, wait until they allow you, they bang your car and so on. And nobody shot at them. And they're expressing themselves. And they have a right to do that, to express themselves. Only that they need to minimize the inconvenience to other people. And then you have another group of people, Kenyans, expressing their dissatisfaction, their anger, and they get shot at. I mean, don't we see those double standards? One group is expressing itself, nobody shoots at it. Another group begins to express its anger in a similar fashion, and they get shot at. I see a big problem in what I call Luonization of the problems we have in this country, that this narrative that it's a Luo problem. The only thing we need to deal about is this Luo and his Luos. Whereas these grievances go well beyond Luos. And as you've just said it, NASA is a coalition of many people who come from many different communities in this country, including Kenyatta's community, including William Ruto's community, and so on and so forth. So it's a narrative that we all need to completely be against and actually destroy that narrative, that you cannot take this and try to coin it as a community problem. It is a national problem that we all ought to pay attention to as Kenyans and not try to pigeonhole it as a community problem.
Right. And the question is whether the idea of mass protests would really work. And are Kenyans tired of the situation as it is? I mean, I saw a comment on social media, somebody who's a strong supporter of Uhuru Kenyatta, but saying we cannot underscore the role that Raila Odinga has played in Kenyan politics for the past 4 decades or so. But they also said this is a man who is fighting for a country that has proven he does not want to be fought for. Yesterday, on Sunday rather, he called on his supporters to boycott work on Monday. But we saw Kenyans taking the other direction. On Facebook and Twitter, there was the hashtag Turudi Kazini, or the Turudi Kazini challenge. Is this an indication that the fact that even NASA's strongholds defied that order, an indication that Kenyans are really tired and want to go back to normal? They cannot continue this any longer, Mark?
First and foremost, I'd like to say that every human life is very critical, and we cannot downplay any single human life lost, whether it's in Kibera or in Runda or in Karen. I think as a nation we need to come to that point where we value human life as human life, regardless of political divide. That's very critical. The second part that is very interesting is, as a nation, we need to come to the point and ask ourselves the critical question that is Raila Odinga's time coming to an end. And that is a question that only he himself can answer based on how he treats this particular situation. And this is how I mean. The defiance of Kenyans to be able to go to work yesterday tells you that there is a significant decrease in his ability to mobilize just from a speech. And that is going to be tested further today, given the statement that he gives. Now, if I was to give him political advice and communication advice, I would tell him to take the Nelson Mandela route, to retire, become an elder statesman. And I'm not saying this from a bad place, to retire, become an elder statesman, and become active in the creation of the generation that comes after him. This is going to be the most critical task, because the question is, Jubilee today in Parliament and in Senate has an unassailable majority. Even before you count the Kanus and the Freedom parties and things like that from Northeastern, Jubilee by itself has a huge majority. The question the nation has to ask itself is who is going to take up the role of the opposition? Who's going to keep the government in check? And in that same space, let us remember, to his point about the president, I think the president has reached out to the opposition in saying that I'm willing to work with both sides of the divide. We need to hold the president to that. We need to take him seriously. And as a country, if we hope to move forward, there needs to be dialogue between Raila and Uhuru, not necessarily for power sharing, but for enacting agendas that are good for this nation.
All right, we are discussing the possible outcomes of the anticipated Raila declaration later today on the early edition of Kivumbi 2017. At this point, we'd like to release those watching us on KTN Home, and Life and Style is coming up next. But for those who want to keep up with this conversation, do cross over to KTN News. The conversation continues right now. All right, let me come to you, Moses. Whatever announcement, whatever declaration will be given, like I mentioned, will have an impact. Now, let's move away from the country's security for a moment and focus on the future of the opposition NASA coalition and whatever statement will be given by Raila Odinga today. Many have been speculating, as to whether this coalition will stand if Raila Odinga concedes defeat or whatever decision he will be giving. How do you think this is likely to play out, especially for the 5 principles in the coalition?
To be honest, Michelle, I think the opposition at this point is in a very perilous moment. If you look at the opposition politics in this country, it has tended to arise or revolve around the Luo Nyanza region. And so that is where that has been the locus to which other communities have brought on board. With that, if Raila today retires or goes out of active politics, it is going to significantly weaken the opposition. Because I believe if you look at how the Nyanza region has tended to, the relationship between Raila Odinga and the Nyanza region, the relationship has tended to be very pure in terms of Raila has almost had a unanimous support among the community, owing to a long history beginning during the time of his father. So if Raila exits the stage, the politics in Nyanza region might now become transactional as it happens in other parts of the country. For example, in the Rift Valley. So, there will not be purity in terms of opposition politics.
Right. Simeka, how do you think this is likely to play out? I mean, we have the other principles rather, Musalia Mudavadi, Moses Wetangula, who has already clinched his senatorial seat. How is it likely to play out on their political futures? I
think one thing we should be asking, if if Isaac Ruto was the presidential candidate for NASA and the scenario played out exactly as it has,
right,
would we be calling on him to retire from politics? What is this obsession with people telling Raila to... Why don't we leave him to make his own decisions as an individual? Because nothing in our laws, in our constitution stops him if he so wants and if people accept to continue having a role in politics. I think it's this thing of personalizing everything and condemning him and demonizing him is unfair to him.
Right.
That is his style. Those are his choices. Leave them to him. And let us just examine those choices in the context of what is good for the nation and also make our choices, because he presents himself to us as Kenyans. He doesn't elect himself.
Right.
He comes to us as Kenyans. That will be the fate, I think, I believe actually, of the other principles. For those of them who choose to continue having an active role in politics, they will continue to present themselves to Kenyans at different levels and ask for support so that they can either lead their counties, constituencies, or the nation. I do not see that. Well, obviously, as my brother here has just said, their stature diminishes, their political power diminishes because they were hoping to win an election to lead government. We know from experience we've had for a long time in this nation that whenever you get someone in government who does not believe in political competition, it can be extremely difficult for the opposition because they can use every tactic, and they've done it, the current government has done it, to make it extremely difficult for the opposition to project itself on the national stage. So I would say the other principles better expect that, well, unless Kenyatta and William Ruto perhaps decide to change their style of doing things. I have been seeing in the news that already they are deregistering an organization that is perceived, to do things that support the opposition. This is Kenya Human Rights Commission. I hope it's not true, but from what I hear, it is true. Those are signs. You saw what happened to the media in the early 2013. We saw what happened to other NGOs. All those are signs of intolerance. And the other principles, and any other person actually who wants to get into into competitive politics, better beware of that. Better actually observe that and not limit it to Raila. Remove it away from Raila and ask yourself, what if it's yourself tomorrow who wants to contest against President Kenyatta or to oppose Jubilee?
Right.
Would you be making the same arguments?
And Raila has been, ostracized for a bit. He did bring these claims of rigging way before Kenyans went to the polls. But when he said that, he said, Jubilee are planning to rig, but this time we've closed all the loopholes for them to rig. And then after the election and after the outcome, he comes out and say, I told you guys Jubilee was going to rig, and this time we will not give up. So what happened to the measures they put in place to ensure that Jubilee does not rig? But in your view, how difficult a task is it going to be for them to prove that they actually won this election, considering that Jubilee now has the majority in Parliament?
One of the most interesting things, and I don't know whether it is a consequence of strategy or it is a lack of communication strategy. One of the most difficult things to follow in the narrative that is NASA is from before the election started, the narrative of rigging was spotted. Now, one can assume that it was always their strategy to deny any result of the election, because if I keep telling you beforehand that this is what is going to happen, then I am psychologically preparing you so that in case I lose, I get to the point where I just tell you it was stolen anyway. And that plays into the narrative that Moses talked about earlier when he said that is it possible that this is a narrative that they want to give the Kenyan people, where we are obsessed with the thought that this was stolen. So for 5 years, his constituency is nursing a wound that is not real. That is the question, because it is a communication strategy. If you want to ruin a marriage, I don't know whether you're married, Michelle, or all I need to do is tell you, I saw your husband in a club. And you know what that does is it casts doubt, and for the next 2-3 weeks, you'll be trying to find out which club, when did he go, looking through his pockets, and that is what the situation that we are creating. So the burden of proof is on NASA to come out and show whether these allegations are real or not. That is the question. Now, secondly, no one is calling on Raila to retire from a bad position. What we are actually talking about, and this also goes for President Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and every person who is in national politics, one of the problems we have in this country is we do not have a process where we are nurturing the leaders who are to follow us. That is why in NASA, you will say we should not take Babu Owino seriously. But why is NASA bringing in Babu Owino if we're not supposed to take him seriously? It is because we are not nurturing leaders in this country. We are not picking up young people and leading them to become leaders. And the only way we lead other people in becoming leaders is if we who are of the older generation give space for them. That's how it works. That's just how life is. It is not anything personal about Raila Odinga. In fact, I as a person enjoy rather having someone who's vocal in the opposition, because my worry is without Raila Odinga, who's going to be in the opposition? And that is a question the country needs to answer.
In fact, getting back to that point, I think the Jubilee coalition, I can say now, is oversized. It has become too big. And naturally requires, for democracy to be vibrant, the politics needs to be competitive. So I think there is a possibility that I see the Jubilee coalition fracturing. Various voices, I think, will arise within the Jubilee coalition. I look, for example, naturally there's no heir at the moment to Uhuru Kenyatta. And that region has made a pledge, sort of, to support William Ruto in 2022. But I don't think that will be the case. I think, divisions will arise and an heir will come in the process and will fit into the equation of opposition politics.
Right. And at the end of the day, the clarion call is for national peace and cohesion. In his acceptance speech, President Uhuru Kenyatta, they're saying national unity will be his maiden duty once he begins his work on his second term. But Simeka, again, if we're going on the line of national unity and cohesion, the power of Raila Odinga's words today really will determine where the country goes, what direction the country takes in that route. How do you think he should address this? Because there's been criticism that the NASA leaders have not been very sensitive with their utterances since they began airing the grievances.
I think airing the grievance in itself is not necessarily wrong. For me, I have to push that back that let whoever wants to allege that an election has been rigged allege and put the pressure on them, as you're rightly doing, to produce evidence and give them time in the right forums to produce that evidence that an election has been rigged, or otherwise ignore them. If you think you can actually totally ignore them. But public expression, let me remind you of something. The current American president, actually in the lead up to the election, said many, many times that the election has been rigged. The election is going to be rigged, and so on and so forth. And after the election, he was elected. It happened that he was elected as the president. Allegations came up that there was some kind of hacking of their system by Russians, by whoever. They haven't put out any evidence in public, but they actually have instituted an inquiry. The government of the US, yes, the federal government has instituted an inquiry to find out, was this system actually hacked? Meaning that it's not about these individuals, but it's about our systems in our society. If we have systems that regulate how we relate and ensure that these systems work, it doesn't matter how powerful Raila is and whatever he says. It doesn't matter how Uhuru Kenyatta, how powerful he is and whatever he says. We will always be assured, as the rest of Kenyans, that we have systems in our society to take care of any crossing of the red line if you so wish. We would always be assured that, never mind, he can say whatever he wants, but we have systems that will work. If he says anything criminal, we are assured.
Right.
We have a system that will take care of that. If you say something that is not criminal but just crosses the red line in terms of what it could do to national unity and cohesion, we will be assured. But we live in such a fragile society. Our systems have been so shaken by people who are supposed to be nurturing them for them to mature, to protect us in the manner that I've explained here, that perhaps that is why we are extremely nervous of what Raila Odinga could say. For me, for as long as he does not say anything that is criminal, like criminal incitement, he makes demands that are legitimate. He asks people to do things that are lawful, constitutional, and legitimate. I wouldn't worry. As my brother here said, we need to test our systems. We need to test the things that our constitution provide for us to relate with each other, to prosecute grievances and so on. And they include things that we are uncomfortable with, like protests. Again, going back to the USA, from day one, there have been protests. They still continue. Nobody tells them that, hey, national cohesion, unity, peace. But they come here to tell us that if you are protesting, you are threatening peace.
Right.
That is not true.
The question then would be, without going through the judicial process, how much can these protests really achieve? And then one mark of abiding by the Constitution, other than going out to protest, which is a constitutional right, is also going through the institutions rather that have been provided by the Constitution, and among them is the judiciary. What does it say about the systems in our country now that the opposition does not want to go to court? But remember, just before the elections, they had about 20 to 30 cases with the IEBC in court, and many of them, we saw many times when the cases are in their favor, they give very good words for the court, and then when the ruling isn't in their favor, they're discrediting the court. What does that say about our systems?
There are two things that are critical. Number one, NASA had 32 cases in court, okay? And one of the products of those 32 cases is we had by far one of the best election days in Kenyan history. Let's just be honest on that. So number one, we have proven that the court system is able to deliver to the Kenyan people a better and more credible process. Number two, the same court case they're disparaging in 2013 is what brought the changes that we saw in 2017. So number one, let us just put our trust in the court systems, because we have proven, not from the government side, but actually from the NASA side, that our court systems do work. And that brings me to my second point. You cannot go and demonstrate without having proof of what you're demonstrating for. This is where the problem begins.
Right.
It's like if I show up and I tell you my car has been stolen, the first question the police would ask me is, where is your logbook? You need to prove the existence of whatever you're demonstrating about. And this is what NASA needs to do, not even for its own sake, but for the sake of our democracy and for the sake of the peace of mind of the Kenyan person. Because what happens, you see, they may have lost the case in 2013, okay? But in this election, we didn't have a green book, a black book, a red book, and a blue book. We did not have many books. We had one book, all right? We didn't have our kits fail. We had one kit that worked in terms of identifying voters, okay? So the reality of the matter is, let's not run away from the court process saying because it did not necessarily hand me a win, it does not work. It handed the Kenyan people a win.
Right.
And that brings the other point that is very critical to understand. Even the United States of America, there was a claim, and there still is a claim, by Donald Trump that there were 2 million illegals who voted. There is no investigation about illegals. Why? Because he did not give any evidence towards it. The Russian investigation is happening because the FBI and different intelligence organizations came out and said, we have some evidence pointing to a Russian hack. That is what we need. No one is saying NASA does not have a right to complain. What we are saying is, NASA, please give us the evidence from your tallying centers, from your returning agents, so that we can have a discussion based on facts.
All right. Now, of course, President Uhuru Kenyatta is, if things remain as is, expected to be sworn in on the 28th of August. Is it? That is not very long from now. Moses, should things change? I mean, should the declaration today affect those timelines, that the swearing in will not be taking place on that particular date? What are Kenyans going to be treated to? What is the constitutional provisions that Kenya will be going through after that?
The only mechanism I'm aware of that can extend those timelines are if a petition is filed in the Supreme Court. I think the deadline is on Friday.
Yes.
If it is not filed, then the swearing in of the president will go on as normal.
So as we speak, they say the Supreme Court is not an option, but if that is not an option, then President Uhuru Kenyatta will be sworn in?
I mean, definitely. I see. I mean, that's what the law says. Yeah.
All right. Of course, we will be waiting to see that. But let's go revisit the issue of dialogue with the president, because it's one that has been explored by many people as seemingly one of the only options that the two can have in maintaining peace in the country. But President Uhuru Kenyatta made it very clear that he is the president of everybody, even those who did not vote for him. Because even if you go with those 6 million votes, it is a large following for any leader really to have. Mark, do you think the country will continue to be divided along, literally in half if things remain as is and President Uhuru Kenyatta is sworn in?
There are two questions that you need to answer. Number one, will NASA hold as a coalition as is? There's an entirely huge possibility that the four other principals could seek an opportunity to take over Raila's clout and Raila's power. That is definitely a possibility. In fact, if I was one of them, that's what I'd be angling for, because whoever becomes Raila's successor has the potential to be Kenya's next president in 2022. So there's a lot of thinking in terms of what happens in 2022. The second thing is, let's remember that a lot of people within NASA, the governors and the MPs and the senators, are ascending to office now. Do they want to suspend their ascension to back Raila? That's the other question. The third question is this: what is there to be gained by Raila pushing an agenda on his side? First, let's understand that much of the demonstrations that we've seen have been from the ODM side of NASA.
Right.
It's not been a NASA issue. We've not seen Wiper candidates coming out and saying, let's wait for direction on Tuesday. We've seen Wetangula has been quiet. We've seen, in fact, after election, the day of the announcement, Mudavadi also has been quiet. We've not seen Kalonzo Musyoka. So the question is, will NASA hold? And my prediction is it won't, because each of these principals will want to gain political capital from Raila's exit, maybe from politics.
Right. And Okay, of course, Orengo and Wetangula, remain in politics, even in the current dispensation. Let me maybe explore the question many Kenyans are asking. Are we talking about an entire general election that was a sham, or is the opposition only pointing to the sham being in the presidential election? Because the question has been whether Orengo and Wetangula would then denounce their wins in their respective positions to back the claims of a sham election.
Actually, when they made a statement, I think the second statement Raila Odinga made, he questioned the results system, not just for the presidential. In fact, he said it goes as far as MCA. I just hope if you look in your archives, you will actually find this. So they didn't just question the results, the projection of the presidential results, but also the other position. And there has been an acknowledgement, as he has just said a short while ago, it was a beautiful election day. The queuing, the voting, and so on. I have not heard anybody question that. What I've had questioned is now the results. You know, the transmission of results and the actual results being announced. That's the only aspect that is being questioned. And for all of us, for now, it is very difficult actually to remove Raila from that equation. But for all of us at some point need to focus on, did IEBC, Raila or no Raila, Kenyatta or no Kenyatta, did IEBC actually do the right thing?
Right.
Did it use the Kenya Integrated Elections Management System? When results were being relayed, were they relayed as the law and the regulations say? Did the text come at the same time as the image of the Form 34A? Those are questions we should ask. Remove Raila and Kenyatta and others from the equation and ask those questions and seek answers from the IEBC.
Right.
When they made a claim that the system has been hacked, Chebukati, the chairman, said, we will investigate. Did they investigate? Can they also give us, the results and say, look, we instituted this kind of investigation and this is what we found out? So inevitably, it's difficult to remove the men who are they're mainly men, actually, they are men who are contesting. It's difficult to remove them from the equation. But let's try as hard as possible to actually see what those grievances are pointing at in terms of our systems. Because it's more than a mere electoral contest for State House.
Right.
It has to go beyond that. Even when Raila questions and insists that he won, I would be disappointed if it's just about him going into State House. It has to be more than that, what is it that he feels is so fundamentally flawed, even if it's not for him, even if it steps aside, that in future it still portends peril to this nation, that we need to focus on it and fix it.
And the IBC was seemingly the chairman, in this entire situation. After Chebukati said that, the next day we had the CEO, Ezra Chiloba, come out and say there was actually no hacking in their system. But he also did say that they have 7 days, since the election, and they're not really in a rush to announce the president. What they wanted for them is to ensure that the announcement is free, fair, and credible. Now, remember, that was the same day when NASA gave, their final grievances. IBC said, we have looked at the grievances given by the opposition, but we will address them after the swearing in. Moses, what do you think that says as to the weight of the grievances that NASA has addressed to the IBC?
From where I sit, Raila said the election in total was a sham. I don't think he only referred to the presidential election. But from a neutral observer point of view, I am able to observe things, even without Raila's allegations, I'm able to observe things that I think deserves an audit. For example, I thought what Chebukati announced as the final presidential tally is actually not what is in the portal at the moment. So I think there is Kenyans deserve some explanation, or there needs to be another legal process to determine why that is not the case, and provide further information about that discrepancy. And going back a little bit, I don't think politicians are really honest, even from the part of the opposition leader and how they've been going to court in terms of trying to make the electoral process better. I think politicians are in this business for self-preservation. So I think it's just a consequence in their pursuit of self-preservation that it has been the case that the electoral system has been improved. So I expect them to, to go to court, let the legal process play out, let the improvements that come out of that legal process become part of the new order.
And whatever declaration made today, will it hold any water if the court process really is not involved?
Well, depends on what declaration it will be. He said he will tell Kenyans the next steps or the way forward. It depends on what those declarations will be. What if he says, okay, we've actually found out that Uhuru won fairly and we concede.
Right.
I mean, I know that inevitably...
What are the chances of that?
In other words, I'm just saying, even if I'm pushing it too far, let's give him benefit of doubt.
Right.
Let's just give him benefit of doubt and say, he probably has something to tell us. Let's wait until he tells us, and then now we can begin to judge him. Instead of second-guessing him, instead of prejudging him before we know what it is that he's about to tell the nation. I really would like to push for that kind of position, that let's just wait and see what is it he wants to say and what details will he provide, and then we begin to examine that statement and the details therein, and on that basis make our judgments.
Right, and of course many saying that if this really is his last bullet, and he has earlier mentioned a man who's been in politics for 4 decades, made such big differences in Kenya's politics, then he would want to leave with a legacy that Kenyans want to remember with a smile on their faces. But Mark, let's have your final comments on this. We don't know what time Raila Odinga will be making his major declaration, but there's a lot of tension in the country. Your word to Kenyans as they await that declaration.
My word first to the Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga is, number one, is that my prayer is that whatever action he takes is for the betterment of democracy in this country. Let me tell you, I am one of those people who believes in interrogating the results, interrogating the process. Why? Because even if something is perfect, if you want to stay at number one, you've got to keep perfecting it. And I think that's a good thing for our country. But to his statements today, and my statement to the country is this. Number one, there is no politician that is worth your life, and there is no person that is worth a bullet because they're demonstrating. So my statement is this: both the rock and the bullet need to be silenced over our country, and let us learn to dialogue, because these issues can be dialogued and solved in a very legal and peaceful manner. I think that's my message to Kenya.
And let's also forget leaders from across the political divide are sitting together, drinking tea, even at the night when the elections were
I'm sure
being...
they're at Intercontinental right now having a hearty laugh while the rest of us have tension. That's the truth. They have security, they have bodyguards, they have drivers, you know.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen. We'll have to close it there. Communication specialist and political analyst Mark Bichachi. We also have Joseph Simeka, who is a political analyst, as well as Moses Cherono, also a political commentator here on Kivumbi 2017, as we try to establish and find out what major declaration NASA's Raila Odinga will be giving as to their next step forward as an opposition coalition. Remember, they have disputed the results of the presidential election. What will come next? Do stay tuned to Kivumbi 2017 for that and more. Let's take a short commercial break. Just stay with us. So much more on the other side.
Sure.